I ran wild when I was a teenager. Looking back, I believe that joining the army saved me from jail. That's not why I signed up. I walked into the recruiter's office because I had seen how the most beautiful girls all flocked around the soldier boys in my local bar one Saturday night, not long before the fight broke out that left me with a split lip. The sergeant behind the desk eyed me up with a dour expression that looked like it had been carved onto his face, then slid over a form for me to read and sign. "You know which way up to hold a pen?" he asked. I wanted to tell him to go to hell, but I wanted myself a uniform and a gal draped over my shoulder more, so I buttoned it. In the 5 years since then, knowing when to keep my mouth shut had been a saving grace for me in the infantry. I'm not the strongest or the fastest, but I've never questioned an order out loud and have always got to it as quickly as I could. As the truck carried us towards the city, I sat in silence, ready for whatever was about to be thrown at me next. A storm was hot on her heels, a bad one. It was due to reach the city in a few hours' time, and the authorities had ordered a total evacuation and requested military support. The army did not regard grunts like us as important enough to have a view from our transport, but as the miles passed, the constant sound of horns sounding, of sirens wailing, and the chatter of helicopter blades passing overhead made my skin tingle with anticipation. We disembarked at 1700 hours. The NCOs screamed at us to move it. Out on the street, dusk was beginning to shroud the office blocks, which rose around us in darkness. We lined up and stood to attention as an officer addressed us. "This is a covert mission. It will not be included in the official records, and you will not talk about it. Drunk or sober or in the throes of passion with the toothless cross-eyed loves of your lives. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir," we cried out as one. No clearer what our task was, but more wired by the minute. I fell into step behind the man in front of me when the order came. "Single file." We moved forwards and I realized we were heading underground. A manhole cover was propped open and the soldiers in front of me were scrambling down it. When my turn came, I descended a narrow ladder affixed to the side of the wall. When my boots reached the bottom, I could just about make out that I was in a narrow tunnel. My breath frosted in the air, and an intense stench of decay made me feel suddenly sick. Further along the tunnel, out of my sight, some wit called out, "We helping the rats relocate, Sergeant?" The reply shot back, amplified in the claustrophobic space. "Zip it. There are low-life scum using these tunnels to hide in. We're going to flush them out, and when we reach the surface, there'll be a nice surprise waiting for them. 1,000 rounds a minute worth of instant justice, all out of sight of the bleeding heart civilians." My mouth felt very dry. Using the storm as cover to take out bad guys like this appalled me. But I had my orders, and I would obey. I tried to breathe nice and slow. We set off, soon branching off into groups of 6 as the tunnel split and split again. I was the tail of our drab snake. As we progressed, I wondered what kind of people were using this network of tunnels to evade the law. Wondered what crimes they'd committed to bring in highly trained troops to deal with them. Whoever they were, whatever they had done, they did not stand a chance. The soldier ahead of me broke wind. A quiet yee-haw followed from further down the line. The best of the best, I thought with a wry grin as I passed a new tunnel branching off to one side. We had not deviated down it. We were clearly keeping on straight ahead. I glanced down the new tunnel, wondering where it led, and saw movement, I said clearly into my radio. I'd been able to make out no details, just a blur of something travelling at speeds across the far end of the new tunnel, which must, I figure, have led to yet another tunnel which ran parallel to the one we were in. A moment of static followed. Then, "Acknowledged. Double check all weapons live." I have no idea how we were meant to open fire in here, if it came to that, without serious risk of hitting each other. But mine was not to wonder why. Mine was to do and... "Sergeant, possible hostiles, 3 o'clock. The voice on the radio crackled in my headset. "Eyes to your right, boys. came the reply. I tensed. It looked like it was time to flush some criminal dirt out into the vengeful light of day. The scream filled the tunnel. There was a heartbeat of silence, and then everyone tried speaking on their radios at once. It came out of the tunnel. Grabbed him. Hold your fire, Tukowski. Can you hear me? Copy. I could see nothing. Just the forms of the soldiers in front of me in the gloom. I knew Tukowski. He had drank me under the table on more than one occasion, had a goofy grin and a child on the way. I said a silent prayer that he was okay, and steadied myself. The call came over the radio again. Tukowski, respond. He did not reply. I swore quietly. We needed to get moving again. If Tukowski had been picked off by hostiles in one of the parallel tunnels, we were an easy target. Finally, the order came. Backtrack, we're going to the surface, regroup. But it was too late. Gunfire exploded. The sound in the confined space set off explosions of pain in my ears. Men were shouting. The man in front of me stumbled, fell to his knees. I grabbed him, tried to haul him back up. All the while, the sergeant was trying to hold back the chaos by yelling orders into the radio. It was so much white noise. I managed to get the soldier to his feet, then something tore him away from me, pulled him back to the ground, and there was a shape on him. Some body, some thing that held his neck in his jaws and was biting. The soldier's body thrashed and his hands beat at the thing that was attacking him. Moments later, he fell still, and the thing on top of him looked up at me. Blood dripped from its teeth. It reared up, leapt towards me. I felt the impact, then nothing more. I don't know how much time passed before I came round. My eyes were drawn first to the flickering light, the naked flame of a candle. I realized as my sight cleared, the white wax stem was mounted in an ornate holder which twisted with an S shape down to the ground, where bones lay scattered. There were human skulls and rib cages, legs and arms, some broken, some whole, and what looked like skeletons of foxes and rats. All were intermingled and rose to form a platform on which sat a nightmare made real. She, I say she, because the curves of her chest, visible beneath the torn, filthy rags she wore, rested on a throne of death. I began to retch. Around her feet lay bodies still wearing military uniforms. The pale skin was tight over the bone beneath, as if the blood that ran in their veins and nestled in their flesh had been taken. My comrades, murdered, defiled. I spat, tried to raise my head in defiance, tried to hide the terror I was feeling in every fibre of my being. "What the hell are you?" I asked. Her skin was wrinkled and scarred and danced with fleas, and when she smiled, as she did at my question, jagged teeth were revealed. She lifted one hand, waved long fingers, each nail of which looked as if it had been decorated with fresh blood. At this, a dozen creatures emerged from behind the throne and advanced on me. Like her, they wore rags over filthy, damaged skin. Pus hung from open wounds on some as they half crawled, half walked towards me. I saw that one held something clasped in its hand. It opened its fingers and threw a toy soldier at my feet. This was a couple of inches tall, made of green plastic. I'd played with toys like this when I was a boy, but what were these revolting things doing with it? The creature looked at me. Its eyes were narrow and clouded over, those of a being which favoured the dark over light. It pointed at the toy, pointed at me. Then a second of the creatures came forward. From its hand threw a small wooden block, another child's plaything. There was a question mark painted on the block. The paint was cracked and faded with age. The rest of the things then compounded my confusion by throwing forward dozens more toy soldiers. "I don't know what you want with me," I managed to say, "but all you'll get is name, rank and serial number, and a promise to see you burn in hell." The creatures turned to look at the she-thing who sat watching over us. She stood slowly and, with a twisted grace, descended. This sent the other things into a frenzy of activity that ended with more wooden blocks being laid at her feet. She studied them for a moment, and then one by one started to push individual blocks forward with her hands. Each block had a letter of the alphabet painted on it. Seeming satisfied, she stepped back. I read down the line of blocks. How many like you? I answered by aiming a wad of spit at her. It fell short, but I figured she had got the message. There was intelligence here, and she was clearly the smartest, the queen of the pack. I figured they'd spared me to get intel on the scale of the attack that was being mounted on them. If I was to survive, I needed to act, and fast. But there was no way I was going to betray my fellow soldiers. To buy time, I pointed at the mold of toy soldiers. At a nod from her hideousness, the other creatures pushed them closer to me. I began to slowly count out plastic figurines. They watched me, seemingly transfixed, grotesquely childlike. I took my chance, threw myself at the knife I'd seen still in the belt of one of my butchered comrades, freed it, span round and pressed the blade against the queen's throat. "Unless you want a new leader, I suggest you all back off," I told them. They cowered, waiting, it seemed, for a signal. But she kept her hands by her side and did not struggle as I began to walk us away, through the tunnels until we reached the ladder reaching upwards. I held the blade closer, allowed it to dig into her skin, whispered, "Don't." We emerged into the street. There was no one else in sight, no sirens. The storm was here and the city appeared deserted. Wind and rain battered against us. I felt exhilarated. I held her tighter still. Her skin was hot and she smelled of fear, of danger, of the darkness and everything that was forbidden. My pulse racing, I led us away, into the night. I had escaped, with my life. I am off-grid now, scavenging what I need and living in a derelict building on the edge of the city. After what happened, I can no longer follow orders, and I cannot live as an ordinary man again. I will live and die as I choose, free of all the constraints I once knew. I checked there was no one in sight out on the street and slipped through the broken door, back inside the old, abandoned warehouse. It was dark, cold. The musk of death and decay greeted me. I took the meat I'd stolen from the butcher's van to her. I held the small carcasses over her mouth and let the blood drip. She sighed, then pushed one of the wooden blocks she cradled in her lap towards me. Her fingers lingered on the faded rose-red heart painted on it. I put my hand on her ravaged skin and leant in for a kiss. I spent most of my childhood winters with my grandmother in northern Sweden. She and her two sisters lived on the outskirts of a small town in an area called Blekinge, or the Blue Hills. They had a small grey house. They did have electricity, but only at night, and the heat was powered by a furnace. In the daytime, the Blue Hills was this calm and serene place where you could almost hear the snow melt. But at night, it was just this endless field of white, fading into darkness. It was the most beautiful and terrifying place I've ever been. I remember one night in particular, when I was about 7 years old. My grandmother took me ice fishing, and as I sat there, staring up at the stars with a hot dog in my hand, I noticed one star brighter than all others. It twinkled like a burning candle. It was green. "That's the green star," my grandmother said. "It can only be seen in special places far up north, and only by special people. Don't look at it too long, or it'll turn the snow green. Thrice blinks the green star, misfortune becomes you. It was nothing but superstition, but I did as she told me. She gave me an old cast iron key to hold and play with. It was some sort of good luck charm. Still, all I wanted to do was stare at the bright green star twinkling away up there. There was something magical to it. As the years passed, I stopped going to my grandmother in the winter. Instead, there was school, tests, girlfriends, and sports taking up all my time. But when she fell ill, we had one last chance to visit her. I'm so glad I did. She was in good spirits to the very end. She passed away right there in that grey house in the middle of nowhere, the same month as her two sisters. Her ashes were spread on the lake. The green star was still there. I graduated, went to college, got my first job. I got engaged to my girlfriend Samantha, or Sam, at 24. For our 5-year anniversary, we were planning a trip to Barcelona. Then came the pandemic. Throwing out our plans, we had to find something else to do. Our first idea was to get diving certificates, but the restrictions in our area was too tough. Instead, we decided to go winter camping, all on our own. Sam found a lodge we could rent, and we both had a few days off of work to cash in. We managed to get a 5-day weekend, and we would spend 3 of those up north. It wasn't the Blue Hills, but in a way, it felt like planning a trip back home. The more I thought about it, the more excited I got. A few days before we went, Sam had to go out of town for a business meeting. As was routine, she had to take COVID tests before and after she went. On her way back, she tested positive. She called me alarmingly early in the morning. "I don't want you to catch it," she said. "You go on your own. I know how much you've been looking forward to it. I'm sorry." We talked about it, and she convinced me. She would be coming home, and by then I'd be up north. It was the best compromise we could come up with. On my way home, I'd stay a few days at a motel while she isolated. But that was a problem for future me. As the day came, I packed the car, called Sam, and set off down the highway. It felt right. It was weird being without Sam, but I didn't feel alone. She wanted me to experience this, and in a way, it felt like Grandma was with me. I was singing old songs she taught me, and caught myself glancing up at the sky. The further I got from the cities, the more I could admire them. They were there all along, waiting for me to come home. Wonderful. What was less wonderful was the 35-minute hike from where I parked my car up to the lodge. Without Sam to help me, I felt myself getting more unsure of myself. Was this even the right way? What if I was lost? Not a lot of people have spent their winters walking through snow that reaches up to their knees, and it takes ages to get anywhere. When you're also using a flashlight to navigate up a narrow path and trying not to trip, you get this enormous sense of being exposed. There's something primal in that emotion, but also something inexplicably real about it. When you've spent months or years worrying about quarterly reports and budget revisions, being out in the wild gives you perspective. It took me longer than I'd like to admit finding that lodge. 2 rooms, 4 beds, a small kitchen, no power but a diesel generator outside the furnace to stay warm. The lodge was on this small hill on a clearing in the woods. The view was out of this world, reaching for miles. There could have been 100 other lodges out there. I would never know. I spent a few hours just settling in, warmed a pot of coffee, cut up a salami, and brought a chair outside. You never get used to how bright the stars really are once you get out of the cities. It felt like coming home after a long day, looking up at them like I used to. And right there, if you looked close enough, was the green star. If you don't know where to look, you won't see it. But I've seen it. I've always seen it over and over, and I know just where to look. Just like back in the day, it was still there. I couldn't take my eyes off of it. It brought a tear to my eye seeing it again. It took me right back to that night on the ice, fishing with Grandma. Only seen in special places up north, I said to myself. There it is, Grandma. As I blinked away the cold from my eyes, the star was suddenly gone. I looked around, and it took me a few seconds to find it again. It gave me an uneasy feeling. Was it really there? It was no brighter than a nightshade lamp. Maybe I was imagining it. Still, there it was. How could I not admire it? I must have sat there for at least 2 hours. My coffee grew cold, and my salami was getting frozen. All the while, I just looked at the stars, breathing in the fresh air. It was going to be a good night. It was hard to sleep that night. You don't realize how much you miss hearing certain sounds until they're gone. Someone sleeping next to you, cars honking outside, the buzz of electronics. Take all that away, and you get hyper-aware of every little thing. I stayed up for hours, listening to creaking pine trees and branches dancing in the wind. I had slept like this 100 nights, but this time felt different. Something out there was off. The next day, I went for a walk. There was a lake nearby, and I wanted to take a walk across the ice. I placed the bag, brought all my safety equipment, and called Sam. I couldn't get through, unsurprisingly, but I promised myself I'd try again on the ice. In general, it's a bad idea to venture out on the ice alone, but I'd done it 1,000 times. This wouldn't be a problem. I brought my ice auger and fishing gear out on the ice. It took me several hours to get a proper hole in the ice. I set up 2 small baited rods and leaned back with a thermos, listening to an audiobook. I tried giving Sam a call, but it still didn't work. Figures. I sat there in a world of my own for hours. I didn't catch anything, but that was fine. I was at peace, but I still couldn't shake the feeling of something missing. Maybe it was Sam, or my grandma. Maybe it was something else. As the sun started to set, I caught my dinner, butchered it, put it on ice, and started packing up. As the stars started to twinkle, I heard a chilling noise. A large snap just beneath me. I froze. I crouched down to better balance myself. Another crack. The ice was thick, but the sound of ice breaking underneath is impossible to mishear. I did what I was taught. I lay down flat to distribute my weight evenly and started crawling back to shore. I made it back to the shoreline, leaving some of my equipment behind. I still had my headphones, but I left the fishing equipment and the fish behind. I just stood there for a few minutes, listening for the ice to crack. It was sudden. In a matter of seconds, the ice broke. All my fishing gear fell through the ice. I recoiled, backing away to the forest. From there, I could see it. The hole in the ice around my fishing spot was perfectly round. Unnaturally so. That wasn't the end of it. On my way back to the lodge, I heard a loud snap from a nearby pine tree. It fell over just a few feet ahead of me. If I hadn't stopped to check my cell coverage, that thing would have broken my neck. I heard other suspicious noises all throughout the evening, and the relaxing wind in the pine trees started sounding more sinister. I made myself another pot of coffee and brought out the last piece of my salami, but this time it felt like I was just doing it to watch my back. I debated whether or not to spend another day there, and I was leaning towards not. Sam would agree. That night, the stars were brighter than ever, and right there, brighter than all, was the green star. I couldn't look away. It was like trying to avoid the sun. It just burned into my eyes, through my eyelids. It seemed to grow brighter by the second, and I had to hold up a hand to block it. I closed my eyes, held up my hand, and waited. I was obviously having some sort of moment. That settled it. I was going back in the morning. As I took down my hand, I lost my breath. The green star was closer. It was as big as my fist, and close enough for me to see the surface. A squirming, moving surface, like breathing clouds in the distance. It was a glowing ball in the sky, bright as the moon, colouring the entire hillside in a wash of green. It was a thick light, so potent that it felt like I could taste it. It had a strobe effect, making my moving hands look like they lagged behind my thoughts. I could feel myself pushing through it, like a physical force. It was blinding, unreal, like a fire in the sky, making me hot enough to sweat. I got up from my seat, staring myself near blind. I snapped out of it. I looked away. The edge of the forest was lined with creatures. Deer, hares, foxes, even a few domesticated animals like chickens, cows and dogs. And in the back, behind all the other creatures, were people. Broken people. Some pale as ice, others gored beyond recognition. One person in particular stuck out to me. A young woman with a broken neck and a rat-eaten body. No stomach, no fingers, no toes. A wide open mouth at an impossible angle. No tongue. Dead, wintergreen eyes. They all stood there, in the distance, looking at me from the edge of the tree line, all bathed in the green light of the star above. I picked up my car keys and ran them between my fingers. I needed to feel something. I needed to feel that this was happening. Once I realized it was, my breath got caught in my throat. I was locked between fight or flight, and I didn't know what was what. But the warmth from the green star was real. Whatever I did next would be real. I turned to run. There she was. I almost ran straight into her. It was as if the tree line had moved closer. The light was more intense than ever. All around me, silhouettes were closing in. I backed up against the wall of the lodge, the broken bodies closer and closer. In the light of the green star, they all looked hollow. In a pained groan, they reached out towards me. Man, animal, and everything in between. I fell to my knees, scrambling for balance. I screamed myself hoarse, scratching at the wall of the lodge like a cornered animal. My fingers were buried in blood and dirt, my nails nearly bending backwards from the effort. There had to be something, anything. In my head, my screams were a desperate prayer to anyone, to anything. I felt a cold hand on my leg. I was crying. My tears tried to shield me from seeing what was really happening. And there, something, a small cast iron key, the same my grandmother once had given me to play with. I held it tight and felt the cold return. Curled up in a fetal position, I laid in the snow and cried until my eyes were raw. I would never look at the stars the same again. The next day, I went home, numb. I know for a fact that not everyone can see the green star. Sam has never seen it, and even other people I know from up north have never seen it. But, as my grandma used to say, it takes a special place and special people. Don't look too closely. Question what you see and force yourself to look away every now and then. I got back home to Sam, but I didn't know how to tell her. I still don't. I don't know what I really saw. But I don't want to see it ever again. The first time I saw the creature was 2 days ago, on my way into work. It was early morning, around 6 a.m, and I was driving down the street when I saw the strangest looking snowman I'd ever laid eyes on. It was taller than an ordinary snowman, made of 4 large round boulders of ice instead of the usual 3. It had extra arms as well. 6 sticks came off from his thorax like giant insect legs. 3 sticks on each side, crooked and knobby. 2 more branches were protruding from its face, like warped, misshapen mandibles. It had a wicked grin with sharp teeth made of jagged, broken stones. Wow, what kind of creepy-ass latchkey kids build a snowman like that? I asked myself aloud, picturing Calvin from Calvin and the Hobbes and his demented snowman escapades. Only, this was not funny. It was highly disturbing for some reason I couldn't put my finger on. The effect was terrifying, like a giant insectile snow alien, a totem of ice made for a malevolent frozen god. And worse yet, its gaze seemed to follow me as I drove past in the low light of the morning. Surely just my imagination, I told myself. Tired eyes and not enough sleep. But still, I glanced in the mirror and saw its head was turned in my direction, when I had been certain it had been facing the other way before. I shuddered involuntarily and continued driving, feeling like a dark cloud was following me for the rest of the day. On the way home later, I was pleasantly surprised to see the snowman had been taken down. I realized I had been holding my breath as I turned into the street I lived on, oddly afraid as I approached the house where the snow creature had been constructed. Maybe the kid's parents found the thing as creepy as I did, I thought to myself. Either way, I was glad to see it gone. Continuing down the street to my house, I backed into my driveway, then looked up and froze when I saw the exact same snowman was now on my neighbour's front lawn across the street. Its head turned so it was looking straight at me. Its extra legs and arms appeared to be waving in the strong winds, making it look animated and alive. I got out of the car, eyeing the snowman across the road suspiciously. "Hey, Jordan," said a Weasley voice to my left as I set my feet down on the slick driveway. Caught off guard, I slipped on the black ice. After pinwheeling and sliding for a few scary moments, I recovered my balance by grabbing onto the hood of the car with both hands. Turning, I looked to see my neighbour, Bill, was standing there on a ladder, putting up Christmas lights and eyeing me strangely. I realised I had made a high-pitched yelp of fear when he had spoken, right before my awkward little dance on the ice. "You alright?" "Fine," I said. "Just surprised me, that's all." He laughed as if that was the funniest thing in the world. "Got a show last night," he said, his words punctuated by the punch of his staple gun into the wood beneath the eaves. "Once in a lifetime, if you ask me." "Huh?" I said, confused. "What show?" He laughed again. "The Northern Lights? Didn't you see them? Better than a movie, man, I'll tell you. They say that sort of thing doesn't come along very often, not this far south." "Had to get to bed early for work. Must have missed it." He whistled softly. "Oh, that's a tragedy. You won't get a chance like that again. Once in a lifetime. They said so on the local news this morning." I'd always found Bill's voice to be slightly annoying, like a weasel or a field rodent of some kind, although it did match his facial features and mannerisms. He moved quickly and constantly, jumping from project to project as if he didn't have any real job, just housework. His Christmas decorations were already the nicest on the street, and yet he was still putting more lights up. Meanwhile, we'd been too busy to even put up a wreath or a Christmas tree. He had a giant snowblower parked just inside his open garage, which I loathed with a passion. He was out every morning at 6 a.m. using it, even on weekends. His driveway and sidewalk were always immaculate and free of snow. Ours was usually the opposite of that. "Hey, Bill, do you see that snowman across the street?" I asked. He turned on the ladder just slightly to look over his shoulder, then went back to stapling. Thwack, thwack, thwack. "Yeah, it's a snowman. So? I could have sworn..." I stopped myself, realizing how crazy it all would sound. "What?" "Nothing. Just had a long day. I must be imagining things. I'll talk to you later, Bill." I began walking inside and he called after me. "Oh, by the way, don't forget to shovel the walkway on your side. I saw a bylaw officer out earlier. Wouldn't want you to get another ticket like last week." "Sure, thanks, Bill," I said, trying to maintain my composure. He'd probably called them himself. After a 12-hour shift, the last thing I wanted to do was go back outside in the cold and shovel the icy walkway under his scrutinizing gaze. Bill always acted friendly, but it was well known he resented most of the neighbors for various reasons and relentlessly gossiped about everyone. I went inside and found my wife was laying down in bed with a headache. She had left a note out saying she wasn't feeling well and I'd have to make my own dinner. After popping a frozen pizza in the oven, I went out to shovel the sidewalk, spreading salt in the driveway so it would hopefully melt by morning. As I looked up from my work, I couldn't help but notice the snowman again. And it was closer this time. Yes, it almost certainly was. Almost at the street now, as if approaching me very softly. I shook my head and finished with shoveling, then returned to the warmth of the indoors. My pizza had been forgotten, and the house was beginning to fill with greyish smoke and the charcoal smell of cheap burnt pizza dough. After airing out the house, I made a can of beans and toast and went to bed, feeling slightly hungry, my mind running through a strange idea over and over again. The thought seemed ludicrous, far-fetched and bizarre, and yet I couldn't stop circling it. My dreams that night were terrible, but I forgot almost everything the second I woke up, being left only with the unease of knowing I'd been chased in my sleep by something cold and evil, with too many legs and beady black eyes. For 8 hours, I relentlessly slumbered and fought a demon in my dreams, and so when I rolled out of bed, I was still exhausted and my eyes refused to stay open without a concerted effort. Coffee helped, as it always did, and I ventured out into cold darkness and scraped off the car for my morning drive to work. Suddenly, I was shocked wide awake when I looked up to see the reflection of the snowman creature from across the street, standing right behind me. My heartbeat was suddenly hammering hard in my chest, and I actually dropped the ice scraper from my hand. I turned around and saw the thing had been standing just inches away. Certain that it had not been there a few moments before, I began to feel shaky and sick with fear. Getting into my car without turning around, I gunned the engine, not wanting to break eye contact with the snowman. The black charcoal eyes stared back at me as the engine began to rev, and I drove away, unsure what else to do. Would anyone believe me if I told them? Driving down the street, my rational mind began to make up excuses instantly. "You were so tired, you just didn't see it in the dark," my brain told me. "Snowmen don't move themselves. It's just local college kids moving it around, playing pranks on the neighbors. Living snowmen, that's ridiculous. These things don't happen in real life." The day passed quickly while I was at work. We were so busy that I didn't even think about the snowman for most of the day, until I was leaving and getting in my car to drive home. I had fully convinced myself at that point it was all just the kids playing pranks, that I'd just been tired and hadn't noticed they moved the snowman into the divide between my house and Bill's. We live in the semi-houses that are connected together in the middle, so we share this small, narrow lawn between our driveways. I pulled up to our house, the evening light now completely gone and replaced by the darkness of night. My stomach was rumbling with hunger after a long day at work, and I began to park. Then I stopped in my tracks. The snowman had moved again. Now it was right in the driveway, blocking it so I couldn't park. It's just college kids, I told myself, and parked on the street instead. I walked back to the house, feeling uneasy as the snowman glared at me, appraising me as I came closer. The creature's head was lowered like a bull about to charge, and I could barely make out its eyes looking right at me from beneath its brow, hateful and staring. The effect was terrifying, making him look demonic and malicious somehow. Something else caught my eye. For the first time I'd ever seen, Bill's driveway was not perfectly cleared of snow. His sidewalk likewise had a few inches piled up on it. This was very strange, considering how meticulous he was with his household upkeep. There was also something else too. His garage door was slightly ajar and the light was on inside. There was a sound coming from the interior that I didn't like one bit. It was like the sound my cat made when eating wet food, sloppy, snarfing and dribbling. I couldn't help it. Despite my fear, I was overwhelmed with curiosity and needed to see what was making that horrible noise. It sounded large and inhuman, and I needed to know for certain if my suspicions were correct. Walking past the hideous snowman, I pulled open the garage door and gasped, horrified at what had been revealed behind it. The usually well-kept garage was in disarray. Shovels, axes and saws had been knocked from their organised places and were strewn everywhere. Bags of salt and soil had been spilled, and the light bulb hanging from the ceiling was off its axis, crooked and flickering. And at the centre of all of this was Bill. Or at least what remained of him. He had been eviscerated and disemboweled, the top half of his body now completely separated from the legs, his torso a cavity of mangled flesh and ruined organs. Surrounding Bill were several of the snow creatures, now horizontal and standing on all 6 legs like giant insects. They were feasting on his viscera and vital organs. They acted like a pack of wolves, tearing him apart and rending flesh from bone, snapping at one another greedily as they fought over the choicest morsels. I saw Bill's eyes were still open, and he was blinking, somehow alive despite all of this, his mouth making soft bubbling, gurgling sounds as blood poured out from between his lips. Then there was a soft crunching noise behind me, and I spun around to see the other snowman creature from outside. It was crawling up behind me like a giant spider, creeping so quietly across the snow I had barely heard it. It saw me and hissed a warning to the others, who likewise turned and hissed like cats. They began to skitter across the cement floor towards me, as the other one did the same, even closer to striking. Terrified, I searched the nearby space for a weapon. A snow shovel caught my eye, and I grabbed it and spun with it in my hand. It made contact with the face of the creature just as it was leaping at my midsection with its branch-like arms outstretched. The feeling was like taking a swing at a brick wall, and the handle rattled and vibrated in my hand painfully after the impact. But it seemed to do the trick. The creature's teeth were crooked and its head deformed from the blow, and it made a noise like an injured dog as it retreated and ran from the house. The other 3 creatures were momentarily stunned by my attack on their lookout, but they regained their composure quickly, seeing I was outnumbered. They raced toward me and panicked, throwing the shovel at the one in front like a javelin. The blade of the shovel cut through the creature's face like a knife through butter, exposing its Elenoid brain matter. A fountain of green blood began to splurt like a geyser from its exposed brainstem, and it crumpled dead to the floor. 2 of them were left, but I was without a weapon now, and they sensed their opportunity. They moved towards me, and I only had a few moments to think of a way to respond. They were far too quick to outrun. I never make it to my house or my car. Then the snowblower caught my eye. I remembered when Bill had bought the damn noisy thing. He'd bragged about it for months, showing off its features to anyone who would listen. He was particularly fond of the push-button start mechanism. "No more pulling a starter cord over and over in the freezing weather, Jordan. This baby is top of the line," he told me one day excitedly, demonstrating it for me. With no other options, I grabbed it quickly and pulled out the choke, then tipped it over and hit the green start button just as the creatures dove at me, their jaws wide open and dripping with blood. I wedged my feet between the base and lifted the snowblower up a few feet into the air with all my effort. The creatures had never encountered anything like a snowblower, I guess, since it caught them completely off guard. One of them jumped right into it, sending green blood jetting from the top of the machine and spraying it all over me and the ceiling above. I was left with just one of the creatures, who no longer seemed to like the odds, after having seen me murder 3 of its friends. It escaped out the garage door, and I was left alone in the cold, breathing heavily and feeling utterly exhausted. Bill took one last shuddering breath himself and was completely still after that. I stumbled out of the garage, feeling like I'd fallen into another world. I looked around and saw I was alone. Trembling from fear and shaking from the cold, I was about to pull out my phone to call the police. But then I heard the soft crunching sound again. This time, not just from one place, but from all around. Following the sounds, I looked around to see not one, but dozens of the snowman creatures coming from all around, from every direction. Drawn in by the calls of their injured comrades, they flooded the street. My house was blocked by one of them, and more moved in from the other side. But the way to my car was still clear. I ran to it as fast as I could, opening the door and climbing inside quickly. I started it and peeled out of the parking spot, just as they surrounded my car and began to hammer on the windows, their branch arms squealing and scraping across the glass. Fleeing the neighborhood, I got to a safe spot and called my wife. There was no answer. The local police weren't picking up either. I'm trying to sort out my thoughts now, trying to figure out what to do next, but it seems like no matter what I do, the outcome will be the same. These things multiply too fast. They're too strong and too quick. I hope my wife is okay. I'm building up the courage to go back and try find her. I wish more than anything I'd stay to fight, just so I would know she's alright, and so that I could give her this message. Christine, if you're hearing this, Bill said we can borrow his snowblower. The smell of freshly brewed coffee was strong in the air as I descended the stairs. I stretched languidly when I reached the bottom, my body still trying to wake up after a long, good night's sleep. "Good morning, all," I announced as I made my way into the kitchen. I gave my wife a quick peck as I passed by the stove. "Dad!" my son squealed, hopping out of his chair and rushing over. That never got old. Luke was 4 and a firecracker. I lifted the boy off his feet and swung him around, much to the chagrin of his mother, who was trying to get him to settle down long enough to eat his Cheerios. Noticing Claire's harried expression, I quickly dropped Luke back into his little chair to finish his breakfast. "How did you sleep, little man?" "Fine. Reggie came to see me last night." "Ah, yes. And how is fine Reginald doing these days?" I asked with mock seriousness. "His name is Reggie, Dad, not Reginald," Luke said, drawing out the last syllable as if the name Reginald was an absolutely absurd moniker. "Apologies. How is Reggie doing?" I responded, enunciating the name. My wife shot me a dark look. I knew I shouldn't encourage this new imaginary friend my son had concocted. Claire certainly did not approve, but I honestly couldn't see the harm in it. He was 4 after all. What 4-year-old hasn't had an imaginary friend? And as we had just moved into a new home in a new village, I think it was his way of coping with being in a strange place and settling in. The move to Castlewood was somewhat unexpected. My job had offered the chance of a transfer, along with a sizable promotion. It was too good of a deal to pass up. The drawback was, of course, that the abrupt change had left very little time for my child and wife to acclimate to our new surroundings. "He's okay," said Luke. I glanced up.